Well, this is for AJ. AJ, I want to give you a little bit of a idea of how things have changed since I was your age. The world has changed a great deal. And believe it or not, by the time you're an old man like I am now, you're going to tell your great-grand-nephew, said who you are to me. Let's see, Jim is my nephew, Lissa is my great-niece, so you're my great-grand-nephew. You'll be telling yours what life was like when you were a little boy, and he's going to think it was like living in the Stone Age. Because when I was your age, houses and life were very different. When I was your age, we were still living in the little house out by the farm. And we had an outhouse, which means we didn't have a toilet in the house. We went out to the outhouse and used the outhouse. Rain, summer, winter, fall, it didn't matter. Well, when you were a little kid, you could use the potty, but eventually you had to go to the outhouse. It got big. There was no such thing as a furnace in the house. We had a wood stove in the kitchen with a warming rack above it, closed warming rack like they all had, cast iron stove. And we had a pot-bellied stove in the dining room, living room actually. And we also had in the kitchen and in the living room a grate in the floor, a big metal grate with swirly decorations and full of holes. So the heat that rises could go from the kitchen and the living room upstairs into the bedrooms to warm them. And we'd close those grates during the day to keep the heat down. In the summer we kept them closed all the time, but we opened the windows, Didn't have air conditioning either. We didn't have television. We had an old Philco, a stand-up radio that was taller than you are, in the corner, in the living room. And we listened to the Jack Benny Show, Lux Presents Hollywood, the news, Allen's Alley, Baby Snooks, Les Brown and his orchestra, Jack Benny and Mary Livingston, and all kinds of radio shows all week long. And if you were lucky at your age, my grandparents, when I stayed at the farm, at their house, would let me stay up with them and listen to I Love a Mystery. Came on at 10:30 at night. A Carlton E. Morris production. Very scary stories about vampires. If my mother wanted to iron clothes, she heated the iron on top of the wood stove in the kitchen. That's right. They weren't electric yet. And that meant in the summertime, if you had to iron something, and my mother thought she had to iron sheets and pillowcases, the stove had to be, you had to have a fire in the stove so you could heat the stove, so you could heat the iron, so you could iron the clothes. We had a twice weekly visit, usually in the summer, in the part of the spring and fall, but in the winter only once a week, usually. The Iceman. The Iceman would come with a great, big, huge block of ice. It was a quarter or something like that. And because us kids would run out to the truck when he'd come in the back door, and we'd run out to the truck to get chips of ice to suck on. It didn't matter to us that the cows might have been pooping on them 5 hours earlier. We didn't think about things like that when I was a kid. But why was he bringing ice? Because we didn't have a refrigerator. We had ice boxes. They put that big block of ice in the ice box, and it would melt slowly, and the water would drip to the bottom, and it would go by a little hose, and the little hose would go through the kitchen floor, and then it would go outside and near the gutter. So it would drip all the water outside. Didn't have to dump water like you had to dump ashes from the stoves. You had to always dump the ashes from the stoves every day. You had to do that. And of course, cold, the ice block would be on top because cold goes down. And you had everything in there that you'd have in your refrigerator, except that you had it in an ice box. And they were wooden, big wooden. Ours had it loaded from the top, and it had two big doors that opened up. And it seemed to me it had two smaller doors on the bottom. And it took up a good space on the wall. And above it, my dad had kept this radio on the top of it. Later, when we got a refrigerator, he put a shelf on that wall for the radio. So those are some of the differences we had. Just living in the house. The house was very different than your kind of house, because there was no TV, there was no video games, there was no refrigerator, there was no steam iron. The mother washed clothes in the beginning with a washboard, and then finally my dad got her what was called a wringer washer, and it agitated. You put it in by the tub in the bathroom, and it would plug it in and get the hoses going, and it would agitate the clothes, and then you ran them through a wringer to get the soapy water out and let them drop down into your bathtub and rinse them. And then after they were all down there rinsing, you'd pour the water out of the wash tub into the toilet and flush it away, and then fill it with more fresh water. And then you would wring the clothes out from the tub back into the washer, into that clean water, and you'd repeat that process one more time. And then finally you would go hang the clothes up on clotheslines on the back and front porch if it was rainy, and in the backyard if it was not. So just washing clothes, it wasn't just like you threw them in the washer and waited until the buzzer went off, and then threw them in the dryer and waited until that buzzer went off. Washing clothes was a big deal. A lot of work. Just tons of work. And another thing that there wasn't was, there weren't things like TV dinners. Everything sort of had to be done by scratch. We made our own root beer. We had bottles and a bottle capper, and we made root beer all the time. I grew up, and we made our own ice cream, and we cranked that by hand. And you'd make, then you could have a root beer float, but you did all the work for the root beer float. I used to love to go out to my grandmother's, because I'd go out once we moved from the farm area into town on Perkins Street. I had a little red wagon, and I was only 6 years old, and I was dragging that wagon all the way back out to the farm. It's only about a mile and a half, really. But because Buckley's a small town with farms right up to practically Main Street. And I would go out to get milk and eggs and butter to take home. It was war times. Those things were rationed in the store, but of course they weren't rationed on the farm. So I would try to get to my grandmother's early enough so that I could churn the butter. Because if you churn the butter, you got cookies and milk and all kinds of stuff for your efforts. And we had a big wooden churn, and Grandma would separate the cream from the milk, separate, and then scoop off all the cream, the best cream, because you want to save some cream for cooking, and some cream for coffee, some cream for ice cream, and then some cream for butter. And we would put it in this big wooden butter churn, just wooden paddles, turn it around, and the milk, the fat in the milk, the fat molecules being battered around in there, solidify and grab onto each other. And oh my God, what's happening to us? And the next thing you know, they're one big lump of butter. And when that's done, you pour out the skim milk, and that's good for cooking and good chilled and drinking. Put it in the icebox and let it chill. And then you take the very carefully clean all the butter off the paddle and out of the crock, and then you put it in a pan, and you sprinkle salt on it, and you work it in and work it in and work it in and work it in, and then you put it in little bowl things, and then you got butter. You used to do it all the time. You want butter, you go to the store. You want butter, you go to the refrigerator. Life was very different when I was your age. To see a cartoon, like you can do just about any morning of your life with TV, we had to wait to go to the Cosmo Theater. And it was opened Friday, Saturday, and Sundays, and Wednesdays. But the rest of the week it wasn't open. Not during the war anyway, because we had to have lights out during the war. That meant that at a certain hour the town had to go black, because there was a world war on, and they were afraid that Japanese would fly over and see us and bomb us. So men volunteered, like my dad, who was with the fire department. They'd go from house to block to make sure that no light was coming out of any of the houses. We had dark oilcloth shades we pulled and attached so that we could have the lights on, but no light penetrated outside. So it was as dark as the woods, and a different sort of life than you have today. So I can't think of anything else I wanted to put in this one for you. I can't. I'm sure that there are lots of differences, but right now my head's gone blank. I'll talk about something else later.